During the time of the bubonic plague in Europe, population decreased greatly by the millions. Communities became frantic due to the lack of scientific cause behind the infection, and Europeans were provoked to succumb to atypical actions based on the country they lived in, whether it be in England, France, or Italy. The Black Death started first in China in the early 1300s, and then descended west toward Europe in the mid-1300s. The Black Death spread throughout most of Europe.
Causes of the plague included the pre-existing unsanitary conditions in cities like living with animals and the disposable feces in public places. The disease was primarily caused by infected fleas that traveled on rats that were on boats that crossed the waterways of Europe.
Symptoms of the plague varied. They include fever, vomiting of blood, cough, and appearance of buboes, or gavasicolos, in areas around the groin, the neck, and armpits, which ooze pus and blood when opened.
The religious problem that came with the plague included flagellants, who whipped themselves in public until they bled in order to serve penance for their sins. They believed the plague was God's punishment. Many members of the clergy died, and there was a shortage of priests, and therefore loss of faith in the Catholic Church in Europe.
The first known case in England was a seaman who arrived at Weymouth, Dorset from Gascony in June 1348. That summer was abnormally moist, so the infection spread rather quickly throughout nearby cities. By November 1st of the year, the plague reaches London, an overpopulated and quite unsanitary city, and kills 30,000 of their 70,000 people. The pre-plague population of Europe was about 6 million people, and at least 2 million of those people died during the plague. The death rate in England was especially high in prison monasteries. Up to 2/3 of the clergy in England died from 1348 to 49. 30% of priests died. Farmers and workers died as well. King Edward III passed the Ordinances of Laborers, tried to legislate the return of pre-plague wage levels, but they continued to rise due to the shortage of workers. In religion in England, people turned to public acts of penance, processions lasting 3 days, authorized by the Pope. Ring Around the Rosies became a popular rhyme that was sung explaining the disease. Future outbreaks: 1361 to 62, 1369, 1379 to 83, 1389 to 93, until the late 17th century.
The plague in France entered through Marseille in southern France in 1348. 1/4 of the population died from the plague within 1 year of hitting France. Population decreased due to the plague and due to famine. Farmers were forced to cultivate on infertile land, causing them to be unable to meet the demand for food. By the mid-15th century, the plague, famine, and war wiped out most of the French population. Landholding nobles, who were once rich, suffered because their land had a decreasing value, and many had to sell their land for a lesser value than what they originally bought it for. There also happened to be a higher tax on peasants, which negatively affected the financial support of lower-class families because of the 100 Years' War.
The plague hit Italy in 1348 through Venice, a port city in northern Italy, and Messina, the southwestern coast of Italy. Florence, Rome, Naples, and Venice were severely overpopulated, and the disease spread rapidly in these areas, infecting and killing much of their population. Florence, a thriving and prosperous center of trade and culture, lost approximately 65,000 to the plague. People started to flee the cities to try and escape the plague. No matter where they went in Italy, they could not escape the impending disease. Giovanni Boccaccio wrote the Decameron, a story on 7 men and 3 women's journey throughout the Black Plague. He writes, as our city sank into this affliction and misery, the reverend authority of law, both divine and human, sank with it, and practically disappeared, for those who were supposed to be its ministers and executors were like other people, either dead, sick, or taken up with the needs of their own families, that they could not perform their offices. Thou left everyone else free to make his or her own arrangements.
For English peasants, the 15th century was a golden age of prosperity and new opportunities, much different than the Black Death. Land became increasingly plentiful. Wages increased, and population began to increase again. The Black Death had a profound impact on art, music, and literature, especially in Italy during the Renaissance. These ideas eventually spread throughout all of Europe. After the lack of evidence in science during the Black Death, scientists worked harder to find cures to symptoms, advancing medicine throughout all of Europe. There was also an inspiration for new European architecture, based on the revival of Greco-Roman styles and the Gothic style.